As you go throughout this journey of winning your wife back, I tend to put full precedence on your journey of growth. And the 99% of your focus should be on increasing things like your responsibility, your masculine purpose, your solid boundaries, and your inner control of your emotions. By your changes, she will be influenced by you by proxy. But well, you know that your wife isn't perfect, is she? She has her own issues of anger, resentment, avoidance, not letting go of the past, becoming overly critical, stone cold to you at times. And one of the most common threads of wives I see in my program is her stubbornness, is her coldness, is that past trauma and those patterns of avoiding conflict and avoiding her own emotions. And these traits are oftentimes behavioral obstacles that stand in the way between you and her getting back together in each other's arms. There are perspectives you can have and ways to interact with her to decrease her traumatic reactions and even alter her brain plasticity and increase the amount of healing she has with more immediacy, making it quicker. So let's go over 4 principles in this video. The first principle is to not heal her trauma. I have to start off by telling you that her trauma is not your responsibility to heal. A common pattern for a lot of men is this white knight role that we play. This is the idea that somehow you can fix her. A little quick story about this. I recognize this pattern in most of my relationships. I would purposely be attracted to, drawn to a partner who had a lot of past issues so that I could, 1, focus on her issues, therefore not focus on mine, and 2, validate my own sense of identity of being this savior, this healer, this therapist. I would say things to myself like, well, she's so perfect if she could just fix this one thing about her. It's like she's an angel, but when her trauma activates, she's just a whole other person. Does that sound pretty familiar? By solely focusing on her issues and seeing your wife through the lens of trauma, it displaces the responsibility on yourself for why she's acting that way. This will show up in conversation where she'll criticize you, she'll stab at you, and instead of looking in the mirror and then taking responsibility for why she feels that way, you'll say things to yourself like, well, she's just overreacting. If she didn't have her trauma, then she wouldn't be this way. Even if that were true, it's limiting her to her trauma. And trauma is just a corrective action to an aversive life experience. Principle 2 is to learn it. Now, Jacob was a recent client I've been personally working with. When he was a child, his father abused cocaine in front of him, and his mother was constantly drinking. He even told me that they allowed him to do drugs with them when he was 12 to show him how awful it was. Truth is stranger than fiction. Can't make this stuff up. His father was also incredibly abusive physically and emotionally. He would beat his mother in front of Jacob until Jacob was old enough to jump in the middle and protect his mom at times, but then he would get beaten. This created a sense of hypervigilance, like fight or flight all the time, reacting to any conflict from anyone. He could tell from the slightest nonverbal reactions of his father on how he felt and if he should avoid his father or not. As an adult, this made Jacob hypersensitive to any and all emotions in others. It was a double-edged sword in a way because on one end, he could read people, but on the other, he was deathly afraid of any conflict. Trauma wires our brain in a way to trigger this flight, fight, or freeze response from the seemingly smallest of triggers. So growing up, Jacob told me that whenever someone smelled like alcohol and they got a bit angry, he would panic, even if that person wasn't angry with him. Just the slightest bit of sight of anger, even in movies, would make him somewhat have to breathe like short, right? It was crazy for him to recognize this. So for your wife, if you're running late for a movie, you ordered the wrong takeout dinner, you didn't ask how her day was, or you had a sarcastic tone, her feelings become hurt, angry, and there's a lot of emotion there. And then you'll connect her responses subconsciously to past events, and then you'll react the way you did as a child from that trauma. And for most men, it causes you to walk on eggshells. These strong reactions come with this hypervigilance and physical and psychological system that is triggered. The hurts and the slights are real and not easily put to rest, lingering for days. The person with trauma feels sensitive, constantly assaulted, and often anxious and angry when expectations are not being met, when they sense negativity or withdraw from their partners. All of these reactions are simply defense mechanisms evolved to protect the young child that was unable to protect themselves. I want you to recognize that within yourself. The third principle is to stop identifying the trauma with her. Here's what I mean. My current partner, she told me that our second and third date that she was bipolar. I immediately said, no, you're not. She was like, what? And in the beginning of our relationship, she used to have that label and it would inform the way she was. Now, I'm not saying she doesn't have these slight areas of being crazy, maniac, like getting depressed at times. I think everyone does. But ever since I removed that label, those behaviors have lessened. That self-fulfilling prophecy has stopped. She no longer has that label and her mood swings have stopped. And you have to recognize that the one thing that influences your behavior or your wife's behavior more than anything else is the identity you give her. So stop identifying her with the labels of bipolar, narcissism, anxiety, avoidance, because you'll make it in a way where you react to her causing that label to become permanent and more in who she is. You need to depersonalize these labels from her and see her more of a human. Because imagine, a long time ago, we didn't have these labels. So how did we ultimately interact with people? We didn't see their mania or depression as this like psychological less than tag that was on their forehead. And I would argue that we probably treated people a little bit better. The fourth principle is to set boundaries around it. As you recall, the trauma is set off when she doesn't feel safe. And one of the quickest and easiest ways and most consistent ways to reduce those triggers is by cultivating an environment between the two of you to make her feel safe. And you do so by setting proper, clear, strong boundaries. Now, I'm not going to go into depth on how to do this because I have a video that you can check out on the channel on how to do this, okay? You can watch it at the end of this video. All I will say about boundaries is think about it like this. When she was a child and the trauma behaviors were manifesting and forming for her, her environment was chaotic, okay? There was no order, there was no safety. I mean, think about Jacob. When his dad was abusing cocaine and coming home drunk and he didn't understand what was going on, it was very chaotic. There was no consistency in his environment. And so when you have strong, consistent boundaries that she understands, she feels safer with you. And when she feels safer with you, her traumatic responses, her defense mechanisms don't need to come out. Control and order help prevent this trauma from arising. The fifth principle is to forgive it. Now look, I speak a lot about forgiveness on this channel. Oftentimes your wife's traumatic responses have hurt you. And a lot of men hold on to resentment when she's done that. It's such a common trope of the nice guy that when you get through the conflict, you just want peace again. You don't want to bring up the things she's done to hurt you because that will just bring up the conflict. So you sweep those things under the rug because you just want to be happy. But when the dust settles, God forbid you actually express your needs and express how you felt by her hurting you. Because if you did, she'll just blow up again, right? And things will be uncomfortable. However, you need to address those things. And in order to address them appropriately, you must first forgive her. Because if you never forgive her, when you do bring up those things, it'll be in conflict when she's saying things about you. So you're saying things about her that she's like, what? That bothered you? And you never brought it up before. And this is one of the tropes of the nice guy. You must set clear boundaries, but also forgive her first. The sixth principle is to love her trauma. Now, this one may be hard for most men to grasp, but I found a really good metaphor recently that I want to share with you. It is the farmer and the fruit tree. Now, your wife or girlfriend is this fruit tree. In order for it to bear fruit, what must the farmer do? He must lead first, because the masculine leads, the feminine follows. He must lead first in pruning the tree, making sure it's in the right soil, giving it enough water, giving enough sunlight, protecting it from pests. You, as the farmer, must cultivate this sense of protection and service and love in order for her to bear an abundant amount of fruit for you. That fruit of your labor is the woman that you want, is that love. Now, the thing is, when she's having her traumatic responses, you're not tending to her. She doesn't feel loved by you. I know it's really, really hard to love the things that hurt you. It's very paradoxical emotions in these sides of us, right? It's antithetical or the opposite of logic. And when you can accept and even have love for those sides of her, then they don't come out as much. I want you to think and look at your wife's traumatic responses, right? This coldness of her, and appreciate that the other side of that coin for these behaviors are things you love. Her confidence. You love it when she does make decisions sometimes. When she doesn't need you as much. You don't want her to need you. You want her to want you. Fierce independence that she has and that stubborn nature is attractive. If she was a pushover, you wouldn't respect her either. These things that kind of go overboard a little bit and hurt you are also parts of her that you also love. And so just see these traumatic responses, the traumatic responses, not her traumatic responses, as just aspects of her that are just a little bit on overdrive that are hurting you. And when you're able to give those parts love and accept them for how they are and see where they're really coming from, it's just a defense mechanism that was really cultivated in childhood to protect herself. And you can see her actually in her childlike self that even though she's in an adult body, when she's accessing that part of her being shut down, being angry at you, that was how she responded as a child. And a lot of times it's because of your behavior, but it's not really about you. Okay, so when you can separate yourself from that, say it's my responsibility that I did this to cause her to feel this way, but it's not about me personally, it's about the behavior. That increased acceptance and love is most of the battle, okay? So I have a whole video on boundaries that I talked about right there. You can check out. If you're new to the channel, just consider subscribing, and much love to you. See you in the next one.